Welcome back to American Medicine Today. I'm alongside my friend Ethan Euchre. Now, the opioid epidemic did not go away with COVID, and in many ways, it's gotten worse. And our next guest has seen the impact of prescription painkillers, heroin, and fentanyl firsthand. Please welcome Peter Canning, EMS coordinator at UConn, John Dempsey Hospital, and author of the new book, Killing Season, a paramedic's dispatches from the front lines of the opioid epidemic. Thank you for joining us, Peter.
Thanks, Kimberly and Ethan, for having me on.
Absolutely. Now, can you tell us, when you became a paramedic 25 years ago, you had a very different view of drug addicts than you do now. Can you tell us how your opinion changed?
Yes, so when I started 25 years ago, right out of paramedic school, I had no training in addiction or anything, and I thought that people who use drugs had a character flaw. And I would say to them, what's the matter with you? You're going to end up dead or you're going to end up jail. Just say no. As the overdoses began to increase, particularly in the last 6 or 7 years or so, I began asking my patients, why are you doing this? And then when I started to hear their stories, my views began to change. And I learned that addiction is an actual medical disease. And that for most of these people, they didn't choose to become addicts, that they got injured, they fell off a ladder, they were in a car accident, they had a sports injury, They were given large doses of medicine from their doctors, and then the addiction cycle followed that.
Yeah, we've had people on the show before who, like you say, got in a car accident or some sort of injury. And we talk about pain management all the time. And a lot of doctors, that's what they want to do, is just throw pills at you. And then, like you say, people get addicted to it. And then it's really hard to break that cycle. Some of them even end up homeless. It's really a tragedy.
Yeah, so many years ago, even as a paramedic, I saw a change that initially we didn't treat pain at all. And then suddenly it became all about treating pain. And it turned out that message was driven by the pharmaceutical companies. And so what happened with people is that they would get hurt, they'd get into an accident, they'd be given lots and lots of pain pills, and they'd be told, stay ahead of the pain, keep taking it. But then in time, they'd get cut off, but by then they were already addicted. Mm-hmm. So what they do is they start buying prescription pills on the street, very, very expensive. And so then the same guy selling them the prescription pill also has heroin. It's basically the same drug, and it's so much more cheaper.
It's vicious because we've also heard that these drugs, kind of the progression, and we were talking off camera about it, but each one was presented as an alternative, a better alternative than the drug previous. And each time, all it does is give them another one to get addicted to.
Well, so yeah, there have been basically, 3 cycles in 3 waves of addiction here. Started off with the prescription pain pills. Mm-hmm. And as those started to be abused, they reformulated them. So what would happen, somebody could take that pill and they could crush it or shave it down into a powder, which they would snort. So rather than a 12-hour time release, they could get it all at once. So when they reformulated it so they couldn't crush it, people then turned to heroin, which was so much easier. And then, the heroin increased the deaths, but it's really fentanyl that's really driving the problem here now. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that is a white powder that looks just like powdered heroin, but it's 50 to 100 times stronger.
Now, Peter, you would think that being exposed to all of these ODs and just such suffering would really harden you as a person. Yet you somehow transformed into in a positive way. Can you talk about that?
Well, so it was my patients that did this for me. When I heard their stories and I heard how they always say to me, I used to be a normal person once. And then they would tell me a story, and yes, they were. But then something happened. They got into an accident that changed the trajectory of their life. They went to their doctor. They were given heavy doses of pills. They were cut off, forced to buy stuff on the street. They lost their families. They lost their jobs. They lost their homes. And it's just really terrible. It could be any of us.
Can you tell us, maybe in depth, more of those powerful stories that you saw as a medic?
Yeah, so I'll tell you one I had. I got sent to a car accident, and I found a young woman slumped over the steering wheel. And I could tell by the damage to the car that it wasn't, a powerful accident. And then on the seat, I could see a needle and some heroin bags. And trying to find out her history, I said, well, what happened to you? She said, well, I broke my back cheerleading. And so then I asked her what had happened to her to this time. Well, she had surgery, given heavy doses of medications, got cut off, ended up buying pills from someone she knew. And the next thing you know, she's been in and out of rehab 3 times. And it's the same for all of these people. There was something that set them on that. And then once they get in the grips of opioids, extremely hard for anyone to extricate themselves from.
Well, and let's talk about rehabilitation for some of these people. What is, your book talks about a strategy called harm reduction. What is that?
So harm reduction is a term that I hadn't heard of until a few years ago. What harm reduction does is it recognizes that people are going to use drugs. And it's not just, they can't just say no. Some people use drugs because the addiction is so strong, and others use it because the drugs work for them. Perhaps for a lot of these people have horrible traumas that they're trying to escape from. So rather than just, ignoring their use, you try to make certain that if they are going to use, they do so safely in a way that will enable them to survive until such a point in time when they're ready for help. So harm reduction includes community naloxone, safe needles, clean needle exchange, and safe injection sites. Because the bottom line is that dead people don't recover.
Now, some people on the opposite side might say that just kind of furthers their addiction because now they can go get high in a safe spot.
Well,
what do you say to
here's
that?
The thing, people say, isn't this just enabling? And yes, it's enabling them. It's enabling them to live and be alive. I would much rather have them using drugs in front of a medical professional who can talk to them about their lives and their direction, rather than going into a porta potty or into a dark alley or behind a locked door in a public restroom where we find them dead later on. I'll just tell you one story. A paramedic told me the other day. Somebody came up to him and said, hey, man, you guys saved my life. 2 years ago, I was out here on the streets. My life was falling apart. You treated me kindly. I was finally able to get myself together. And look at this. And he holds a picture. This is my baby. This is my new son. And there's lots of stories out there of people who have recovered.
What do you think is our way out of this opioid epidemic?
The number one thing is to end the stigma, to stop judging users, and to treat them as human beings. The Hippocratic Oath, the Oath of Hippocrates, there's a special line in there that goes, into whoever house I enter to help the sick. So no matter who is out there, we need to help people, and we need to bring them back in from the cold and, embrace them as members of our society.
Yes, and one of the quotes says, helping the lost find their way home. What does that mean to you?
So to me, it's people who have used, who've stumbled into this and been unable to extricate themselves. They've been ostracized. They've been pushed out into the dark. Stigma and law drive them into the shadows where they die alone. And these are people who are recoverable. And, if we bring them in, if we treat it as a medical disease and not as a criminal problem, that's when we can really turn the tide, because the war on drugs hasn't worked.
Well, thank you so much, Peter Canning, for being on the show and showing that help is within reach for those addicted to opiates. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, Kimberly and Ethan.